Good morning. Welcome to Tecman Talks Dynamics. Today I'm here with my good friend Matt Woodhouse, and there's just the two of us today. We thought we'd do a slightly different topic in that we're always talking about the short term, medium term, what's changing. We thought we'd go a little bit more long term, and there's two people who've been around in this space for a few decades now. Let's leave it at decades, not go to centuries just yet. Where can we see this going in 5 or so years? And where do we think, strategically people should think about the future and where they're headed with their dynamic systems, their ERP systems, their CRM systems, their business systems in total?
Well, some of it's crystal ball time, but I think we can see the writing on the wall for some of it. And I think there's certain things that we'd probably like to see as well that's maybe been promised for a long time. And I think cloud computing is enabling some changes, quite substantial changes.
Yeah, because, it's just the availability of kind of compute resource and sophisticated infrastructure that you could never have afforded as an individual, especially small to medium-sized business. It's not just buying it, it's maintaining it, as we know. And so you can just rent that by the minute when you need it. Is a much more kind of scalable model, isn't it? So cloud is bringing a whole bunch of stuff to the table. I mean, I think, we've been on a trend for a while, which is that certainly when my career started, you used to walk up to a desk and a screen and you used to enter the transaction on we called them accounting applications. They weren't even ERP back then. And it was, you put the transaction through and then you went and did the work. Recorded it onto a piece of paper, bought that piece of paper back.
It was recording it for the sake of it, wasn't it, for accounts?
It was a separate, almost kind of ledger entry kind of type system that was, I suppose, took over from manual books. And now we're going to much more, we're realising in some aspects a situation where actually the data is being collected, usually by humans still, but as the transaction happens. So it's much more, a phrase I've used for a long time now is real-time data collection. And I think that's going even steps further where now we're starting to see machines collect the data for us.
Well, the speed of the knowledge of data is increasing. Volume of data and wanting to know the instant live data.
Up to date.
I can't wait overnight. I can only get it every minute. It's now. Push.
Has to be right as of now. Yes.
And I think the whole e-commerce, Amazon kind of process that people have got used to, has driven so much into business these days that the level of service just keeps on just ratcheting up.
And the accuracy level has to be 100%. So it's not just an inventory promise now. It's if I promise it, it has to turn up because there's so many dependencies on every transaction, everything happening as is.
So if you look at integrations, we've had,
which is the key to this.
It is, isn't it? We've had that for a long time. If you're siloed, within your own company, that's okay. We've had integrations for years. Things like EDI and bank integrations. For BC, that's been a slow, hard process. Still quite basic, some of that, but
that's improving. I mean, you look at the open banking stuff and the Avrio stuff, where in effect it can poll your bank every minute, and as soon as it lands in BC. So you haven't got two separate systems, and that's kind of what I'm talking about is real time, integrations between those. And look, 10 years ago, Matt, when we used to implement Nav, I guess it was still just about then, and I don't know whether we've had Business Central for a decade now. Somebody out there will no doubt ping me and tell me. But every integration was a custom integration point. Now you're seeing lots of app source entries with, things like Podfather for proof of deliveries, and there's a dozen out there. I was looking at the kind of labelling side of it yesterday, and kind of the Nice Label and bartender integrations, which are now just kind of plug and go.
Just APIs generally.
It's just APIs generally opening out. But even those APIs, it used to be right. You used to look for the API document and then have to code against that and build
work,
an integration. Isn't it? Yeah. Still work, and so more and more of those are becoming just standard. You've got products like the E1 solutions, which are kind of acting as middleware, but even that, the number of times we need that is kind of reducing right now. But all the time, what it's doing is just bringing back. So your core Dynamics application is just an engine of logic and data, and actually a human isn't feeding it. The machine is. And
where could those integrations, if we look 5 years down the road, I could see there's still room for a lot more. It can do better in terms of integrating.
Oh, massively, yes.
I've always had this concept around, they talked about blockchain for a few years and these secure transactions, and it was going to, I believe it's gone into some levels of EDI, but why can't if
playing with it? It's point-to-point integrations where actually, when are we going to get to the point where
a network of
kind of
data
feeds the data in a standard format into the cloud, and actually the subscription? So we're all used to going to sources. Google's probably the most common one that when you want the information, you just go and ask for it, and it's there. Why isn't that a company perspective? Is there a commerciality kind of? But if the information is fed up with the right security, and you have the key to unlock that security, why does it have to be quite so point-to-point integration? Why can't it be more widespread? You mentioned EDI. That EDI, we do a lot of it, but it's still stuck in the 80s, 1980s.
Well, I've got this vision of the demand that I have then feeds to my suppliers or a choice of suppliers, which then feeds to their suppliers, which then feeds to their suppliers. And why can't that be almost instantaneous? And the logic that each of those suppliers needs to work out how they, what effect that means for their raw materials. Almost kind of like instant MRP through the whole
mushroom across the supply chain.
Yeah. It's
the technology now. It's not a technology factor, is it? It's not the kind of base. The move to cloud where not every organisation is on a cloud-based system yet. No. But you can see the direction of travel, and it's not at its beginning anymore. It's well advanced in the move of a lot of organisations, and so that sharing of information between organisations hasn't really that's in its infancy. That hasn't really started, and government regulatory in this. So I can't recall which, but I remember one country where we looked at the localization, and when you sent your invoice to your customer, you also had to send it to the government.
Yeah.
And then I think there was another one where actually you had to retrieve it from the government. So almost the invoice, to be a valid invoice, had to go through the government, have the government's stamp on it before it went to the customer.
For the UK, we've had Making Tax Digital, which is a monthly, quarterly summary of what it is that you owe from a tax perspective.
That's a very high level, though.
It is. So the next step surely will be the detail of that. And if you've got all your customers and suppliers with their VAT numbers and the amounts, and they're then having to submit theirs, all of a sudden, there's a cross-check here going on to make sure nobody's defrauding the government. And I can see that happening.
If I was in government, I'd very quickly make it illegal to have an invoice from a vendor or send an invoice to a customer that hadn't got a validated VAT number, so that you couldn't, that became an offence for the so on. And I'm sure a lot of people out there will be going, invasion of privacy, all the rest of it. Yeah, but I don't think governments are kind of, when it comes to tax revenue, they have an ambivalent attitude to this. So I think that's got to come. I just hope that that's not that's where you could see a lot more fragmentation in terms of localizations, because making tax digital was UK specific.
Yeah.
If every country goes their own specific route, that's going to be problematic and massively kind of cost.
Yeah, I can see a unified way of doing that being problematic, though, because different countries are so different, aren't they? I mean, maybe
even within the EU,
I think the EU's probably got the most chance from a
Germany to Denmark,
perspective.
and I guess the US as well as just one huge kind of country. So, that will be interesting to see where that goes in kind of data validation. I think what it means for our customers is kind of much more, and the AI piece is can't be ignored on this.
Yeah.
I think it's going to make the setup of the transaction much easier. It's going to kind of come up and say, is this what you want to do?
Yeah.
Rather than you having to push button A, B, C, and
Yeah,
know your steps through it.
recommendations,
Recommendations
yeah.
of kind of, is this the same as kind of type recommendations within the application for all of it.
Hey, Mr. Accountant, it's month end. Does this journal look okay? It's what you normally do.
Normal process, yes. Yeah. So those routine processes are going to be streamlined, if not disappear.
Yeah.
The master data management for me is, that's the key role, and that role in organisations is going to go from kind of being an afterthought to the key role, because if the transaction is happening within milliseconds and is automatic and drives machinery and all the rest of it, the cost of that master data being wrong is going to go up, and therefore the need to make sure it is correct is going to go up, because the consequence of it not being is so much higher.
Well, we've had that for years with manufacturers and item data. That's always been the centre of MRP and MPS and manufacturing and stock control. That's always been really key, but everything is going to be that level now, because you have to rely on that for it to allow those transactions to happen. And if
you're not going to be able to edit it because you're not going to be entering it. So you've got to have your pricing, your costs, everything's got to be absolutely spot on. And so I think that role in client organisations is going to go from, I can see kind of your CTO, you're going to have your corporate data.
Yeah. It's a shift in workload, rather than just checking things and correcting things all the time. It's going to be spending time focusing intelligently and using your brain in terms of setting the data up correctly and making sure that the rest of the system, just this thing underneath, just happens.
Because the transaction won't happen automatically if that master data's
correct,
not right.
Yeah.
And that brings on to kind of where you think, I think most of that master data at the moment is somebody clicks new, enters the record, goes away again. Yeah. The whole of some organisations have approval processes in with that. I think I can see that escalating significantly, because the cost of getting it wrong is going to be there. I can see the feed of item data you mentioned. I can see the feed of that is going to be fed from third parties.
Yeah.
So I think that publishing your sales catalogue externally, so that people are going to go, well, why should I read it off this screen and type it in this screen? I mean,
data. It's all going to be about the data, isn't it? And you can see organisations appearing or starting things where that they're managing catalogue of products.
Yes.
Billions of products.
And so the kind of the integration isn't just going to be the transaction. It's not going to be take a sales order from here and when it becomes a purchase order, pass it on to this organisation. It's going to be take the item data, take the pricing, take the availability. How do you map that through to where it's ultimately perhaps so appears on a screen to a consumer as a completely different product because it's part of an assembly or a manufactured process.
Yeah.
The more complex we make these configurations, these machines, the more difficult they are to maintain right now. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean,
understanding is the first point.
Yeah, it's never going to go away. You know, in terms of the need for some sort of kind of assistance, intelligence around building, designing these systems. It's you know, it's not going to do it itself yet.
So there's a job title in our industry that comes up called solution architect. And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it, you know, people who describe themselves as a solution architect, because I think it's quite it's meant, that term has meant quite a lot. But I do think that, you know, companies are, the CTO role, Chief Technology Officer, you know, their solution architecture for their particular organisation is going to become critical. If you've got all these integration points and how this talks to this and where this where the data flow, understanding that and what the implications of making a change here results in here, that's something we manage, we kind of know for a lot of organisations. But you have to know the individual organisation quite well. And when we go into a new Business Central customer, you know, until we get a clear view of what that information landscape, that solution landscape looks like, that's not well documented typically, is it? It's kind of not obvious. It takes, that's where you have to work with them for a while before you start to understand how that works. I think there's a lot of work where we could document, lay that out better, make that clearer to understand, because I think that's going to become more and more critical with the information flows that go.
And you know, going back to AI, that, you know, is critical. Quality of data is critical for AI to give you that correct information back. So
yeah, it's going to look at the pattern and recommend the wrong result if what it's looking at is wrong. Yeah.
The other thing that's going to change as well, I think, is going to be our roles. Yeah.
Well, there's no surprise there, is it? Because it does change.
But I think there's going to be a certain amount of, you know, you've seen, assisted setups and things like that, and you know, all a bit basic. But some of those, you know, if you look back now, some of those things that we had to do, you know, going off into Azure and setting stuff up now, some of the wizards around some of the integration pieces are just there, and it's like next, bang, it's done. You know, that could have saved half a day. You know, that's going to keep on going.
I think you know, that's where AI, the Copilot piece that Microsoft does, I think the setup for number series, posting setups, you know, it's going to ask you a series of questions, or it's going to recommend a setup, and it's just going to be done. So where in the past we've kind of, sometimes we've imported it, sometimes we've created it from scratch. You know, what sales analysis do you want? You list out what you want your sales analysis to do, and it'll build a chart of accounts that's got that in as the setup. And, you know, when you list that sales analysis, it's going to say, well, do you want, you know, these are the accounts, these are the dimensioned headings, and all of that setup. So,
but, you know, as soon as dimensions get mentioned, though, people go, what's a dimension again?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, but I think that's where that kind of core setup, where you needed to know the best way of it working. And I still think there's a lot of people in our industry who, you know, how many people understand dimension priorities and use them correctly? How many times do you see those configured? How many times do you need them? That's a separate question. But, you know, there's a lot of stuff around that people just skip by and don't exploit to the max,
well,
because
I guess
they can't.
With AI, you'd be able to explain the business problem.
Yes.
And it could then interpret that into what configuration you need.
Which is what we do.
Yeah. Which is exactly what we do.
It's what we do. So I think, that's going to be higher. So our job is almost going to be telling the client to ask the question.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how to ask the question and kind of and fully explore. So it's less core setup. But I mean, that's a trend that we've been on for donkey's years.
Yeah.
A long time. Is less kind of setup and
but we're as busy as we've ever been.
Yes. Well, that's because there's more, people expect more. Because we don't do less kind of core engineering, when's the last time we did a SQL install? Yeah. That used to be routine. Yeah. It's one of the checklist of things that you had to have. Well,
but some of those things get easier. The quicker we can do it, the more we can offer within the same time scale. The demand comes in more. It just naturally feeds more demand, doesn't it?
I mean, I've had the theory for a while that clients have a budget to spend, and they want to get the max for the budget that they can justify, and effectively, if we spend less on the basics, they'll spend that budget on more advanced stuff. So they'll push the envelope a bit further, and the move to subscription with cloud was exactly that, where when they stopped having to buy these six-figure sums on licenses from Microsoft, they all of a sudden threw it at consulting and development to make the solution more integrated, more sophisticated, and do more for their organisation. Because at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're saying, how much time am I going to save? What's the payback for my organisation? And the more it does, the faster the payback. So the more they like the solution.
Yeah.
So I think, it is going to change. I think the integration piece is the bit that it's just going to explode.
Do you think the Microsoft ecosystem, if we're looking at Business Central within that, I kind of think if you look at, you click on your, whatever they call it, the little 9 dots, and there's all these apps, and some of those come and go, and the user's got to choose which app to go into. And you've got BC kind of as part of that. Could you see some sort of merge of all these technologies into something more generic that
I think
deals
you've
with
seen
all
a
of it?
trend where kind of, hey, look, people used to buy Microsoft 5 years ago because it was all Microsoft. It must all work together, and then get a nasty shock when they actually discovered it didn't. And there were separate applications and separate. The classic is Power Platform, CRM platform, and the BC platform, which are two different platforms with a degree of integration. Degree being the operative word. I think the lines are going to get blurred.
Yeah, I think Teams has bought some various technologies together, and that's been a successful one.
Yes,
and I could see that that's certainly continuing. The integration you're getting into ERP and AI and being able to ask it things. Do I need to go to my ERP system? It's just the data I want. I don't need a particular screen. There's a question I have. I want the answer somehow.
I mean, I think Microsoft. I've thought for a while that Microsoft is a platform company. The number of times they'll provide the core and the base, but this is a bit like it's a bit like the truck companies where they manufacture a chassis, and then it goes to a chassis, a separate company, usually in the country where it's going to be used to put the particular truck body on. And if you just want a flatbed, then probably you can buy that from Mercedes or whichever truck company you want to. But if you want a tanker, or if you want then it's not a tanker anymore. Does it tank fuel? Does it tank foodstuffs? Does it tank what does it need? Does it need to tip? How's that work? And then suddenly Mercedes go, well, that doesn't work for us because we want to mass produce. So you go to the specialist manufacturer for your particular area. And I think Microsoft is the mass manufacturer who will satisfy, if they see a demand out there that's hundreds, thousands plus, they might do it.
Yeah.
But once you get into the individual industries and where there are specific nuances which are very specific to that industry, or, you know, I have to say organisation, because the idea that you can produce a vertical and it fits every organisation, that vertical, for me is for the birds. And so I think, you know, I think that's where there still will be a role, and I can't see partners disappearing anytime soon. I think that the future for partners is actually even stronger, because understanding what the client's requirements are and being able to help and guide them through it is not going away anytime soon. Customers employing those people directly, well, some of the bigger ones will, but most people don't need it full time. And once you've built it, those people get bored because the major challenge is done. And so, you know, and probably the maintenance of it, or the moving on of it slowly, is not going to happen at that level of pace. The organisation can't cope with that level of change. So I think the partner role but I do think, you know, the mass market partners who try to sell to every type of customer out there, I don't give much for their future. I think it is going to be about picking the specific sectors and, you know, verticals. What we typically call them verticals is a bit narrow for me, but I think looking at where customers have commonality of requirement and you can produce the others. So coming back, Microsoft's a platform organisation. You'll buy the platform from them, you'll buy the tools from them, but actually the specific manufacturer in this case will be done at a
specialist level.
You know, what's interesting is Microsoft's model in the last decade, 15 years or so, has gone from selling software to selling users. Their license model is all about the users. If you extrapolate the integration model that we talked around, there aren't as many users as there used to be. You know, there's a fundamental dichotomy there between
the systems can do.
We as partners try and eliminate as many users as possible. We try and make users, you know, companies more efficient by at least stabilising their user count. We don't very often drive it down, but we stabilise their user count.
And allow more.
Microsoft monetises by the user.
That's interesting.
That's daft.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's daft from a long-term point of view. At what point are they going to transition from
compute power, isn't it? It's going to be like gas, electricity, compute.
Yeah, but you know, gas and electricity, you understand how many BTUs or MPG you get out, you know.
We've got an idea.
It's going to be very difficult to take compute power and say what it does. I mean, I think it's probably more likely to come into kind of some form of transaction pricing that you do see in some sections. Continuous done it in kind of OCR. A few others have done it. I'm surprised e-commerce hasn't done it more. They've done it a little bit. I think it depends. Some of the transaction, you know,
some of those, you know, if the future is like AI and you know, one transaction involves a lot of thinking from the computer, then that's a lot of compute power. So how would they balance then I guess from Microsoft's perspective, you know, their ideal would be how much resource has it taken.
But, you know, that's where, look, Matt, if you get an invoice from Microsoft for Azure, you have no clue how the figure at the bottom is arrived at, and kind of, if I want to say, show me that transaction, there is no auditability. That's not a sustainable model.
Yeah, I think when you get your gas bill, though, it's a bit kind of, okay.
Yeah, but gas is a simple thing, isn't it? Because it comes in cubic.
But you don't know
cubic meters.
You just assume it's right, though, don't you?
Yeah, but there's laws about having a gas meter, you know, that in most countries, weights and measures or the local or regulatory authorities mean that the gas company can't defraud you. Yeah. You only pay for the gas and the electricity you've used. Electricity, you know, kilowatts. Yeah. In the age of electric car, we're all getting more used to what a kilowatt is.
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose there's certain reliance on
And it's universal
interpreting
across
what
the
is
industry.
what is compute power. Yeah.
If I'm buying compute from Amazon or I'm buying compute from Microsoft or Google or one of the other big clouds, I think that's got to be transparent, because otherwise, I think there'll be a kickback, frankly. People don't like paying for what they don't understand.
Yeah. Hence why they, for now, have gone the user route.
The user route, simplifying. But it's going to be interesting to see how that works.
Cool.
So we rambled on for long enough.
I think so. Yeah.
Has anybody made it to this point in the podcast? Well done. This is the musings of two guys who've been around a bit and have seen a few change over the years.
I'm sure we're going to see some more in the next 5 years as well.
Oh, and pace of change is accelerating.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to watch.
It could be fun.
As long as the coffee keeps flowing and the brain cells keep ticking, we'll enjoy the ride.
Indeed.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.